everybody, to the Kickstart COIL webinar, which is the next webinar in the COIL at UArctic series from the COIL at UArctic thematic network for biodiversity education. This particular webinar is designed for anybody out there who is quite tempted to do a COIL project, but perhaps doesn't quite know how to get started with it. It's a little bit worried about some aspects of what it might involve. And so, what this next 40 minutes will do is give you a first-hand experience of what it's like to start from scratch with a COIL project and how to get through it. And we have Steve Harbert here who's going to do that for us. But before we move into that section, I just want to do a very quick introduction to COIL and COIL at UArctic for anybody that may not be familiar with the concept. So COIL is part of the growing field of virtual exchange, and it stands for Collaborative Online International Learning. And it's really designed to try and promote internationalization at home, but it does much more than that. It is a really good way to develop transferable skills that are essential today in the global workplace, including things like intercultural competency, digital competency, empathy, teamwork, all of those things that we know that employers really, really need. It uses freely available technology like Zoom, Teams, etc. And it is an opportunity for students in one country to collaborate on a project with students in another country. And it could be more than one country if you're feeling ambitious. But the essential idea is to give students exposure to the way students work in different countries, how different systems work in different parts of the world. And one of the key areas, of course, now for in terms of global issues are the Sustainable Development Goals. And so that's something that the UArctic thematic network for COIL and biodiversity is especially keen to encourage COIL projects which are looking at sustainability and the Sustainability Development Goals more generally. So what is COIL at UArctic? Very briefly, it is a new thematic network for the University of the Arctic and a resource, and it is designed to give you all the tools, support, guidance, training that you might need or want to help you run your own COIL project. So that's everything from the how do we set it up, to finding a partner, to engaging the students. It includes testimonials from faculty, from students and other stakeholders who've been involved in COIL. It includes examples of COIL briefs for projects, a whole range of resources, and also links to other networks, COIL networks, to help you find partners too. So at the end of this presentation, you'll see a QR code, and all you have to do is scan that on your phone, and that will take you in to the COIL at UArctic resource. But after you've watched this webinar, if you have any other questions about it at all, just get in touch with me. My name's Izzy Crawford, and I will be happy to help. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over now to Steve, who is going to tell you all about his fantastic COIL journey. And Steve, when you want me to change slide, just give me the thumbs up.
Okay, thanks, Izzy. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so my name's Steve. I'm a lecturer at Robert Gordon University in Scotland. And just a tiny bit about myself. I teach on tourism and hospitality programs here at RGU. So that's at undergraduate and MSc level. And my background, my industry background before joining RGU was actually in the travel industry and international travel, mainly in the sort of activity adventure space. So I was keen from the moment of joining RGU to think about ways I could bring my experience of international travel, working with partners professionally overseas, designing tours for customers from the UK, troubleshooting problems, working cooperatively together to be as successful as we could be. I was keen to try and share that experience with students and look at ways in which I could as he's mentioned, that idea of internationalization at home, internationalize the curriculum that we have. We offer international tourism management, we offer international hospitality management. Our students do get that opportunity to perhaps take a placement, many of them, and they may choose to do that placement overseas. They also have the opportunity to perhaps take a semester abroad and do what we call study abroad, spend a semester studying in a partner institution. But actually, in terms of study abroad, particularly, perhaps only 10% of our students take that opportunity. Financially, it can be challenging for many students. But also, we've discovered that sort of since COVID, that some students are a bit wary, a bit more nervous about the idea of perhaps taking the plunge and moving into a different country and working alongside students that they've never met before, particularly given study abroad often tends to happen in the second year, sometimes the first part of third year. So then I learned a bit about COIL, and I thought that could be an excellent vehicle to use to kind of hit those kind of points that I was trying to hit in terms of opportunities for students. So if you have a look at the UArctic pages that Izzy mentioned earlier on, you'll find one of the elements there is some profiles of staff that are active already in COIL. You'll find my wonderful profile, obviously, and alongside that information about who I am and what I do, there are some examples of the projects that I've run. And I thought I would kind of try and share the experience of the two projects that I've set up and run to date, and how I kind of see that working, and perhaps trying alert you to any kind of pitfalls there might be along the way, and point you in the right direction. So if we could move to the next slide, Izzy, that would be great. So I've run two projects, and the second project that I set up, I definitely learned from the experience of the first one. And the order that I'm about to talk these things through is not kind of set in stone. And I'll perhaps try and highlight where things might vary along the way. So my start point were my students, the cohorts that I was teaching, and where I thought there could be benefit from exposure to a COIL project. Initially, I thought that would be fourth year students, perfect for fourth years, a really good chance to give them some practical experience of kind of connecting with global partners and working together on a project. They're thinking about the future. They're thinking about leaving RGU with their qualification and brushing up their CV. And here, the COIL is a fantastic opportunity to actually bring to life that statement that many students, in my experience, want to put on their CV, which is that they're good at teamwork. They've got experience of teamwork. Well, COIL can give them something to talk about beyond just being good at teamwork. They can actually reference an international project that they collaborated on. So think about the students. There's no kind of limit as to who can be involved. I was a little cautious to begin with. I wanted to work with fourth years because I thought they would grasp that more confidently, perhaps, than certainly the first and second year students I was teaching at that time, just post-COVID. But the most recent project I've run has been with second year students, and we partnered with an institution in Canada, where their cohort were a mixture of first and second year students. So it can work with a younger, newer, fresher cohort, if you like. But thinking about the students, and then thinking about the subjects, obviously the subjects that I teach them, and where there might be some opportunities to kind of open out the teaching that I do into a project. So topic and focus was the next thing for me. It was about identifying what within my teaching might there be that I could expand into a project. And I imagine most of us are used to giving our students some form of group work, even if that's only in a tutorial in week one, and say, by the time I see you next week, please come back having collaborated with some other students in the class and present some information to the rest of the class on this subject, on this topic. And essentially, that's how I started with this my first project. It was extending that piece of group work into a project that students could collaborate internationally, giving them a bit more time to do it. So the project focus for my first COIL was the role of interpretation in wildlife tourism. So I would I'd previously given students kind of some resources to read through, asked them to do some of their own research, and come up with some working examples of how different ways in which interpretation is used, be that on wildlife safaris or nature reserves or national parks. So that was my idea. That's what I wanted to do. And this is how I started. I started with my students and I started with my topic. I hadn't thought about partners yet. In fact, I didn't know if I was going to be able to find a partner. I'd never done COIL before. This is pre the network we now have with UArctic. But I thought in order to attract a partner, I needed to have some ideas initially so that I could actually show them something with an element of viability about it, even if it was just an initial idea. But there's, some of you may well have partners in mind that you want to collaborate with. Maybe you've met with people previously at conferences or webinars such as this, and you've already got an ideal partner in mind. There's no reason why that can't work, and you can start that process of talking about students and topic after you've actually had your first conversation. But for me, it was get an idea, and then I did some research into finding a partner. Um, I didn't have a network. I was relatively new to the university. I actually had a look at our current study abroad profile. So, as an institution, we send students out on study abroad opportunities across a range of universities. So, I looked at where we had existing partnerships for study abroad. Where were we receiving international students from? Where were some of our students going for a semester? And I identified there were a couple of institutions in West Coast Canada. So I reached out to them. I arranged an introduction from our study abroad lead to the study abroad partner in that institution, but said, could you put me in touch with faculty to explore these ideas? Not quite by coincidence, but it certainly helped. I was traveling out for a family holiday to West Coast Canada that first year. So opportunity to kind of just take the time out to go and meet people. That may not always be possible. When I met at the one university on Vancouver Island, one member of staff actually took a break from his holiday to come and meet me. That was very good of him. But that may not always be possible. So it depends upon the time of year. But that was my way in. We have at the UArctic now, as Izzy referred to, a kind of a resource which allows people to kind of post opportunities for projects. I'm currently got a couple of project ideas that I quite like to find partners for. So our own kind of COIL UArctic portal, there's an opportunity perhaps to have a quick browse through there if you're interested in finding out what other people are offering, because maybe you're open to the idea, but you haven't got a particular project idea. So that's one way of doing it. The route that I took is another. And obviously now as I've become more involved in other wider university activities, I'm beginning to build up a professional network on LinkedIn. So there's another avenue there to kind of I'm looking to potentially extend in terms of finding partners in the future. So that's kind of initial kind of stages, I would say. But once you've found a partner, there are a number of things that you'll need to think about and need to work through. And I've put a number of those under this one heading of alignment. Um, COIL for me has always been embedded in my teaching. So it's been in, I've looked at the teaching that I do. I've looked at some of the learning outcomes that the students are expected to kind of address. And I've picked out one or two that I think perhaps might lend themselves to some form of group work. So, aligning your study course with that of another institution is a starting point once you've got your partner. Where is there crossover? Where might there be overlap with what somebody else is teaching in a different part of the world? Can we identify how we can come up with a project that not only is interesting and challenging for the students to embrace, but also actually ticks some of the boxes in terms of their module descriptions, their learning outcomes, their course outcomes. Another issue is alignment in terms of the academic calendar, and that can be challenging. We have, as an institution, I'm sure we're not unique. We don't call them reading weeks, but reading weeks through teaching time. Our teaching time is relatively compressed. Most of our delivery is within a kind of 10-week period, through two blocks, 2 semesters through the year. And not every institution will mirror that. And that might influence. I see that it is a reality, but it's not doesn't have to be a barrier. The beauty about COIL is you can make your projects almost as long or as short as you need. When I knew that with one of the institutions I was working with, there was perhaps only a 4 week definite overlap, it became a 4 week project. But there were a couple of activities that both myself and the partner at the time chose to do out with the project is almost like preparation. So, for example, a field trip we did as being out with the out with the actual core part of the project, but the students were gathering information that they were then able to use during the course of the 4 weeks when we knew that they would be studying on campus and able to swap ideas, meet with their counterparts. IT, that's a rather curious looking haircut, something 80s about that, I think. But anyway, it's meant to be a student at a computer. IT is an issue. As Izzy has said, the beauty about COIL is we're trying to make use of freely available IT. So Zoom, Teams, many institutions will have. But it's worth speaking to your IT colleagues early in the process just to establish if there are any particular constraints to giving students access to a network or a facility that might be hosted at your institution. So with both of the projects that I've run, we've given the students freedom of choice to meet and discuss on any platform they like. That's part of what COIL is about, giving the students that choice to make those decisions. But we felt it important to have a central repository that we can use to store the project brief, to use as a kind of a platform to communicate reminders or important issues that we might want to discuss, and for ultimately the students to post or upload a copy of their output, whatever that output might be that a presentation, be that a poster, or a report of some type, or a video. So I've tended to use Teams for that, but one institution has hosted Teams, and you just need to make sure that the students from another institution can get the right level of access to be able to work with that. So yeah, it's good to get your IT colleagues involved at an early stage. And then the last graphic there, aligning in terms of assessment. A key part of COIL, which I'll share more extensively to you at the end, is a reflective account. The students writing a reflective piece about what they've learned through the COIL process and the COIL project. But also, there's no reason why the COIL project cannot be embedded within whatever form of assessment you or your counterparts might have for the course of study, for the module of study. So that's been the case with both of my projects. Students have been able to use information that they've generated from within the COIL project to expand upon or write about within their assessment piece for me. And then we've asked them to add their reflective account along with some of the evidence from their project, their personal contribution, for example, to their assessment report. So ultimately, when they're graded at the end of their course of study for me, whether that be sustainability or whether that be marine wildlife tourism, a portion of their marks can be allocated or attributed to the COIL project. And I find that quite valuable. And so far, both my partners have kind of agreed with me that that's a really good way to get some buy-in. We would like to think that our students would jump at the chance. And sometimes they get very excited at the prospect of working with students from another country. But knowing that that might actually also count towards their final grade can be a nice little push, for some perhaps more than others. So you can see there in terms of alignment, there are a few kind of details that need to be talked through, but hopefully that gives you an insight into kind of what they might be. We'll talk about timescale at the end. Once you've worked that out, once you know how long your project is, once you know where it's going to sit within your academic calendar, you can then crack on with your brief. Now, everybody here will have the advantage over me of being able to access some existing briefs on our wonderful UArctic pages. So you have you can use them as a template if you wish. I'm not precious about both of my project briefs are there. And you will see if you look at both of them that the second one is very much based upon the first one. So why reinvent the wheel? Once you've got a brief that works, the topic or the focus or the output that you're asking the students to produce may change, but the basic framework of a COIL project in terms of what you're asking them to do can follow a particular format. And essentially, that format for me has been a plenary session at the beginning where both lecturers or instructors introduce themselves online to the whole group of students, introduce the institutions, introduce the purpose of the project, but then create an opportunity for the students to begin introducing themselves to each other, to perhaps meet in the groups that they're going to be working in. And then after that, generally speaking, it's over to the students to decide when to meet. But a project brief gives them some ideas about things that they should be thinking about discussing, gives them some ideas about how to progress through the project. Depending upon the length of the project, the brief might include another session partway through. But if not, then there will be one session at the end where, again, traditionally I've tried to do a kind of debrief where we've had a chance to review the work that students have produced. We give them some feedback within the plenary session on that. But there's an opportunity for the students to tell us about their experience as well, what they liked, what they didn't like, what they thought worked well, those kind of things. Yeah, the students are working in groups. That can be a challenge. We've struggled recently with our intake at undergraduate level, so our numbers have not been great. So I was concerned that, for example, with my second project, I was working with a group of 12 students, but my counterpart in Canada was working with a group of 25, 26. So you need to put a little thought in that kind of scenario into how you're going to balance the groups out. I was concerned at talking with my students about second year level students. I wanted to avoid a situation where they were in a group as the only RGU student. So that meant minimum of 2 RGU students working with a group of 4 or 5 students from another institution. So a little bit of thought into balancing the groups is necessary. You might be fortunate and you have ideally matched groups in terms of size. The other way to take the group, that issue about if you've got small numbers of students, is to perhaps think about working with a third institution. So 3 institutions with smaller numbers, creating groups made up of students from 3 cohorts might be one way of dealing with that. And the other thing which I haven't done, but is certainly part of what COIL can be, is to go cross-curricular. So is not to necessarily look to work with an institution with students who are studying the same subject, but perhaps with bring in some students who are studying a completely different field. So for me, possibly working with students, even if my students are working on sustainability and tourism, working with students from a design faculty who can then be involved in the designing the interpretation materials that the students at RGU have indicated are important. And it can be for the design students to think about and work up ways in which that can best be administered. And then launch. I've really mentioned what I was going to say about launch. Once you've got your brief, once you've worked out your groups, there you go. First session, obviously not in the classroom necessarily, it's going to be online, but you launch your project and fingers crossed all goes swimmingly. Brief word about timescale. Yeah, it depends. If you've got good contacts already, you've got a good network, it may only take you 3 months to work up a project and agree all of the finer details. It may even, I've known one example where it's taken a bit less than that, but 3 months is not perhaps too ambitious, but they can take 12 months. Particularly if at an institutional level there needs to be kind of some rejigging of how and when subjects are delivered to make the project as viable. Certainly that was the case with my last project. It took quite a while to work through things, but it was a sign of commitment from my partner. They were really keen to do it, but they wanted to make sure they had all of their administrative commitments boxed off, squared away, so that they could devote the time they wanted to. So yeah, thinking about when you start, if we're talking for the RGU perspective, we're currently in semester 1. I'm still hopeful that I've got time to finish off a new project to launch towards the second half of semester 2. But for people who are new to this, don't be afraid if what you're actually thinking about is semester one next year, is next September, October. Um, that gives you plenty of time to potentially find the partners and meet on a on a 3, 4 weekly basis to work up the project to be what you want it to be. Um, okay, Izzy, shall we skip on? So, after all of that, is it worth it? I guess I would say yes. It is. It is, and it will be for you too, I'm sure. I learned a lot through the first project, which has informed the second project. And even though some of those things were perhaps more challenging, it didn't put me off, and I'm keen to go and do a third and a fourth. I'm certainly already committed to running the project this year again with the same institution, but I'm still looking for partners for other projects and looking for projects for partners for other projects, perhaps for my colleagues, not just for me as well. But the next slide, Sliddy, Izzy, hopefully kind of illustrates the why it will be worth it. As he mentioned, the kind of wider benefits of COIL. This is a couple of word clouds from the reflective accounts that the students who participated in both my projects produced. So as usual with these things, the size of the text indicates the weight of the number of students that used that language or similar language. I call these emotions. Yeah, we always want our students to enjoy themselves, but they don't always look like they're having fun or enjoying themselves. So it's quite rewarding when they tell you that they really enjoyed part of what essentially is their teaching and learning. So nothing earth-shattering there, perhaps. But you can see also there are some other comments coming up about pride, which again is not something I'm familiar with students giving me in regular kind of feedback about their learning activities. But also some of the more challenging aspects of it, frustration. Somebody talked about it being distressing. The distressing there was actually related to IT and finding that their internet connection was not reliable. Um, but this is part of COIL. It's about, yes, it's about giving them a stimulating, enjoyable learning experience, but it does present them with challenges. And part of the purpose of COIL for me, certainly, and a very important one is learning how to overcome those challenges, learning how to address those challenges, and not to be doing that in isolation, but to be using that group environment to work through issues. The second bubble on the right, again, we talk about COIL being very good at kind of helping to develop those kind of transversal skills. So no surprise that time management, dealing with people from different countries, different time zones would be high up. Obviously, teamwork and communication, but just below those kind of keywords that we might expect, we've got problem solving, we've got organization, we've got self-confidence, which was yes, success. That's one of the things that I wanted. I wouldn't say that to the students that part of the purpose of my projects was developing their self-confidence, but it was definitely part of what I wanted them to try and feel that they could gain. And again, rewardingly, some of those students did say it makes me now think that perhaps I should be thinking about doing a study abroad. Maybe I should be looking at a placement overseas. This has given me the confidence to do that, which sounds too good to be true, but they wrote those reflective accounts. It wasn't me that wrote them. And again, you can see there are obviously still within this some slightly less positive experiences, but again, ones that it's important that we build on and we reflect on and they reflect on through the remainder of their academic journey in terms of, okay, so working in teams can be challenging. How do I learn to speak my mind? How do I get my point across? So it gives a clear kind of reference list of issues and skills to be developed over subsequent teaching and subsequent learning experiences. Um, I think that's about it from me, Izzy. Yeah. So I hope that was helpful. I'll turn my microphone off now, but I'd be happy to answer any questions should they arise.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was absolutely brilliant and just gave such a candid story of your journey through COIL, the highs, the lows, and how to approach the challenges and the rewards at the end for and he also conveyed, I think, how, for faculty it's worth doing too, not just for the students. It's a really rewarding thing to get involved in. So just to say, if anyone would like to find out more about what Steve's been doing with COIL, if you go to the COIL UArctic website, scan the QR code on the screen, and you'll find lots more resources there, including some provided by two of our fabulous COIL at UArctic partners, Mario and Melina, who are both here on the webinar with us now. And I'm going to ask Mariam and Alina if they would be willing to pose some questions for Steve and myself to consider. So I'm just going to stop sharing the screen and come back in. There we go.
Thank you. I'm going to take the liberty of going first, if that's okay with Alina. So I am more, I take the role of COIL coordinator at my institution. And so I do tend to have a little bit of imposter syndrome because I actually have not done a COIL, but I coordinate COILs. I talk to people who do COILs. I hear about them. I promote them. I support them. I walk you through the A to the Z of them, but I actually haven't done a COIL. So my question for you is really for the audience who are faculty, or who are maybe academic deans or chairs. And I guess the question is, who is the right faculty to do this? Who is the right person? Because it might not be for every single person. If I have a team of 100 faculty and I'm trying to figure out who I nudge or tap on the shoulder or suggest or recommend, what would I have to have in me as a faculty member, or why would this not be for me if I was a faculty member thinking about considering or hearing about an opportunity to start doing COIL?
Steve, do you want to go first and then I'll jump in?
And I have one more question after that.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. I think I can't see a barrier to any particular faculty within, for example, RGU, whether that be engineering or business or art, not being able to kind of embrace what COIL can offer, either within their discipline with another institution, or as I mentioned before, kind of cross in a cross-disciplinary way. I know I've got colleagues in the business school who are currently working on a project with two other partner institutions, but the RGU students are actually drawn from engineering and business, and they've got students from India and Nigeria who are drawn from business and engineering. So that I don't think there is any one faculty within my experience or that could not potentially run this. Maybe some faculties would argue that it needs to be within their discipline. Maybe health science in some way might want that, but there's opportunities, I think, across the piece. In terms of faculty, in terms of staff, yes, I mean, I think, I'm, as I said at the outset, I was very keen to try and internationalize my curriculum because I thought we needed to do that. One of my drivers was our loss of our international European students as a result of Brexit. So going from having a room where 50% of the students might be from Poland or Italy to Germany to having students that were nearly all just from Scotland created for me an impetus to do that. That way, obviously, may not be the same for other countries, but I would say probably the sustainable development goals that Izzy has mentioned and highlighted, I mean, they work extremely well. And I think many institutions, I imagine, will be like us in trying to drive forwards, further work to kind of embed those within teaching. And anybody who has that kind of interest, whether it be for a specific goal, one of my projects was about life underwater, goal 14, but those wider educational and cultural learning goals, then they are a very good, COIL is a very good vehicle to explore those. I don't know if that's the best answer to your question, Marion, but that's my kind of take on it. Izzy, have you got?
Yeah, I mean, I'd obviously echo everything that you've just said and possibly go a step further. So for most institutions, higher education institutions, there's actually a strategic imperative and responsibility now to internationalize the curriculum across all subject areas because we inhabit a global world. And that's how technology and communication and work is happening and will continue to happen even more so in the future. So not thinking about how to internationalize the curriculum is really doing a disservice to your students, I believe. Um, in addition to that, I think that we have across the board all have a responsibility to things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Again, it's a global problem that requires a global solution. And the best way to do that is to get our brightest young minds together from different parts of the globe to try and think about how we solve these kind of problems. And COIL is not a difficult tool to use. Yes, there are some potential hurdles to jump over along the way, but they're not insurmountable, and they're the kind of challenges that anyone can resolve. And there are so many helpful tools and resources out there, support out there, particularly in COIL at UArctic, to help you with all of that. But really, it's something that I believe any faculty can do within an institution. If you want it to take off within an institution, there's a couple of things that can help. One is to have a couple of stars like Steve who are willing to talk to other members of staff and try and encourage and support them and role model really why COIL is a good thing to do and how you can embed it into your teaching, because often workload is a concern for people. Is this going to create more work? But as Steve mentioned, once you've created a project, you can run it again and again and again and just tweak aspects of it. So yes, so for me, I would argue that COIL is something that all higher education institutions should be doing, and any faculty member should have a go at.
Thank you. I'm gonna hold my question to see if Alina has questions.
Yeah, hello. I'm here in Finland. We are staying here between the Arctic or sub-Arctic area and middle of Europe. It means that we have a lot of different kind of education networks that are possible and open for the students. And thinking about our students, they are mostly, of course, master level students that are able to select these online courses because the study programs are more flexible for them. But the problem is that they have so many options. So they have so many networks. And so what would be the main benefit of COIL for them? How can I sell the COIL compared to other networks like European Young University Alliance or these? Because they also have special kind of online courses, a set of online courses. So it's like a competition all the time.
It's so true, Alina. And the last few conferences on virtual exchange that I've been to, that's always come up. There are so many networks and ways of doing this kind of international online learning. And just to address the question directly, why COIL then? Why COIL, not something else? I would suggest that COIL, because of the asynchronous and synchronous dimension to it, adds another level of interactivity, I guess, or collaboration. It's very student-led, and it requires students to push themselves out of their comfort zone a bit more to get it to work, perhaps a bit more than you would on a conventional online course of study. And it's especially good for developing those teamwork type skills as well, for all the reasons that Steve's just covered in his presentation. So I don't know, Steve, if you have anything you'd add to that about why COIL and not something else.
Yeah, no, I think the overcoming the challenge and the being in charge of the project and working away. You can obviously flex how much input you have in terms of directing them, but I tend to try and go for the light touch beyond the introduction and the end piece. So if a student comes to me and says, we're having a problem, we don't know how to do this, my initial thought is, well, okay, so tell me what you've done to try and solve it. Is trying to put the ball back into their court. So it's a very there is that element of pressure on them, but it's within a supportive environment. So it's not going to get it to a point where they're going to fall out, hopefully, because you are monitoring what's happening. But and the other aspects in terms of, I'm not sure, I'm not that familiar with many other approaches, but the embedding it, as we said, into an assessment can also help bring the learning to life. A lot of our students, like many others, I guess, are very head down into the assessment, looking at it, worrying about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And we always encourage them to kind of talk to each other and swap their experiences, and that might help them understand concepts. But with the COIL project being at a core part of what an assessment might mean, again, that's bringing them together, and it's giving them the purpose behind the conversations that they need to have as part of the project. And perhaps that's not always the case with an online learning course where you know that you can go away and look at videos and watch materials. The active participation and collaboration, I would say, is probably the key element there to drive that forwards.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Good.
Mariam, did you have another question?
I did. I just wanted to ask, for institutions that have very small COIL initiatives, like maybe they just have 1 or 2 profs in some section of some faculty that are, doing COIL, or maybe you have a bunch of people doing it for the first time, and as he said, it's a lot of work, and there's the resource and time factor. What could we do as COIL coordinators or as international departments or the operational purveyors of COIL to make sure that it doesn't die a slow death in our institution?
Gosh, that is the million-dollar question, and one that personally I can relate to very much. In this time of financial challenges, shall we say, across the entire university sector, unfortunately, internationalization is one of the things that can sometimes be at risk when universities are trying to prioritize core business. And so it needs champions in the institution who will position it strategically as not an add-on, but as absolutely core and vital to the overarching strategic aims of the university. And it does. I mean, COIL very much ticks the boxes of sustainability, of EDI, of inclusion, of digital skills, all of those things and more. And so it's trying to find who are the champions in the institution who can keep it on the agenda and fight for some support. One of the reasons COIL at UArctic has been created is to take some of the pressure off institutions by providing lots of tools and information and guidance, because we know how difficult it is to get that internally. And so it's there to, any member of faculty who wants to give COIL a go shouldn't have to rely on someone else in the institution giving them the green light or providing extra support. If they go to COIL at UArctic, they have, in theory, everything that they need to get going with it. And I would imagine in the future there will be even more, not just from COIL at UArctic, but from other sources too, which we do link to, like COIL Connect, for example.
If I could just add something there, going back to something I touched on maybe in the previously, was the project itself does not have to be particularly time consuming to conceptualize. The project itself probably already exists in the teaching of faculty. So for example, many staff will be either arranging maybe an industry visit or a field visit for their students. Well, there's a COIL project right there. That visit can go ahead as usual, but the partner institution can arrange to do a similar visit in the equivalent, and then the students are getting together to compare their experience of those field visits and how those two different businesses in the same sector are dealing with a particular challenge. So the time is Yeah, the time is writing the emails, finding the partner, but those partners may already exist, and as you said, there are resources to help with that. The project itself, I think, can present itself within people within the teaching. People do not have to worry about coming up with something particularly, wonderfully innovative in terms of, oh, we've got to come up with a challenge and we've got to make it exciting in this particular way. The teaching that people are already doing, I think, can provide the vehicle for a project in most instances, I would argue.
As something else which could be useful for people, most universities or higher education institutions have somebody who's responsible for international recruitment or study abroad, for example, physical mobility, and that person will know of existing partners, international partners that the university has MOUs with or some form of relationship with. Those people are often a good starting point for COIL because you've worked with them perhaps through study abroad or something else. And if you reach out to them and say, would you consider doing a COIL project with us, that's often a good starting point as well. Alina, do you have any other questions that you want to ask?
Not actually any questions. I'm just, we are working now on the new topic, nature-based solutions, and this will be an online course. So maybe we can find partners also from the COIL for that. I think we have started now, but it should be, the main part should be finished by the end of this year. So maybe early next year we could place that also for the
That would
COIL.
be wonderful. So that's the call out to anybody watching this video. Get in touch with Alina if that's a topic that you would like to get involved in. Thank you all so much for participating in the webinar, for Steve for his very inspiring and insightful presentation about his journey through COIL, and to Mariam and Alina for thinking up the kind of questions that other people are probably thinking as well. But if you do have any questions after watching this, please do get in touch with us and we'll be happy to help. So with that, I will stop the recording and say goodbye. Thanks, everybody.
That was great.